Welcome to Crimes. Tonight, we invite you to settle in by the warmth of the fireplace as we tell a story that began in silence, snow, and darkness. A story that would ripple far beyond a quiet New England town and become one of the most polarizing true crime cases in modern America. This is the story of Boston police officer John O'Keefe and the woman accused of killing him, Corinne Reed. It was the night of January 28, 2022, when a powerful winter storm moved into Canton, Massachusetts. Snow fell heavily, coating roads, lawns, and rooftops in white. Despite the worsening weather, John O'Keefe, a 46-year-old Boston police officer, went out for drinks with friends and coworkers. Known as a devoted uncle and a respected officer, O'Keefe had taken in his niece and nephew after the death of their parents, becoming their primary caregiver. That night, he was accompanied by his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Corinne Reed, a 45-year-old former college professor. The evening unfolded across several bars, with alcohol flowing freely. Witnesses later described the mood as social and relaxed, though tensions between O'Keefe and Reed were said to have simmered beneath the surface. Text messages and voicemails from earlier in the relationship hinted at arguments, jealousy, and strain. As the night wore on, the group decided to continue drinking at a private residence, the home of a fellow police officer. Sometime after midnight, Corinne Reed drove John O'Keefe toward that house in her black Lexus SUV. What happened next would become the central mystery of the case. Prosecutors would later claim that Reed dropped O'Keefe off outside the home, then, in a moment of anger or intoxication, reversed her SUV and struck him, leaving him injured and alone in the snow. The defense would argue something entirely different, that O'Keefe entered the home, became involved in a violent altercation, and that his body was later placed outside as part of a cover-up. Hours passed. Snow continued to fall, the temperature dropped. John O'Keefe did not return home. Around 6 a.m., Corinne Reed began searching for him. Accompanied by friends, she returned to the area where she believed she had last seen O'Keefe. There, on the front lawn of the house, partially buried in snow, lay his body. He was unresponsive, his clothing stiff from the cold. Emergency responders were called immediately, but it was too late. John O'Keefe was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy revealed devastating injuries. O'Keefe had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, along with hypothermia. The combination of injuries raised immediate questions. Investigators focused on the possibility that he had been struck by a vehicle and left exposed to freezing conditions for hours. Attention quickly turned to Corinne Reed. According to prosecutors, physical evidence tied Reed to the scene. Her Lexus SUV had a broken tail light. Fragments of red plastic were found in the snow near O'Keefe's body and later discovered embedded in his clothing. Digital data from the SUV suggested the vehicle had reversed abruptly around the time O'Keefe was last known to be alive. Witnesses, including first responders, later testified that Reed repeatedly said, "I hit him, and this is all my fault," while O'Keefe was being treated. Investigators believed they had their case. Corinne Reed was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence of alcohol, and leaving the scene of a deadly accident. The charges stunned the community. Almost immediately, the case drew intense media attention, not only because the victim was a police officer, but because of the dramatic and conflicting narratives that began to emerge. Reed pleaded not guilty. Her defense team mounted an aggressive counterattack, arguing that the investigation was deeply flawed from the start. They claimed evidence was mishandled, timelines were manipulated, and investigators fixated on Reed early on while ignoring alternative explanations. They pointed to the lack of eyewitnesses who actually saw a vehicle strike O'Keefe. They questioned whether the injuries matched a pedestrian collision. They raised concerns about how evidence was collected in the snow, including blood samples gathered in improvised containers. Most controversially, The defense suggested that O'Keefe may have been injured inside the house during a confrontation, and that his body was later moved outside. They cited unexplained injuries, inconsistencies in witness accounts, and alleged digital searches that raised suspicions about when certain people became aware of O'Keefe's condition. Though the judge would later limit how much of this theory could be presented, the implication of a possible cover-up ignited public fascination. The first trial began amid intense scrutiny. Supporters of Corinne Reed packed the courtroom, some wearing pink and holding signs calling for her release. Others rallied for justice for John, insisting that the evidence against Reed was overwhelming. The jury heard weeks of testimony from forensic experts, police officers, digital analysts, medical examiners, and civilian witnesses. They heard about vehicle event data, how modern cars record speed, braking, and gear changes. They heard experts debate whether revering into a person at low speed could cause the injuries O'Keefe suffered. They heard about DNA analysis, cell phone records, voicemail messages, and fragments of plastic that became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. They also heard about mistakes. Investigators failed to properly photograph the scene. Interviews were not recorded. Evidence changed hands multiple times. During testimony, the lead investigator was forced to acknowledge crude and unprofessional text messages he had sent about Corinne Reed during the investigation. Those revelations shook confidence in the integrity of the case. After deliberating, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. The result, a mistrial. Instead of bringing closure, the mistrial intensified public obsession. Online forums exploded with speculation. True crime podcasts dissected every frame of courtroom footage. Bloggers, influencers, and amateur detectives pored over transcripts, photographs, and data logs. The case became more than a legal battle. It became a cultural phenomenon. In 2025, the case returned to court for a retrial. This time, the prosecution refined its approach, focusing heavily on forensic science and digital evidence. They laid out a minute-by-minute timeline, attempting to show that Reed's vehicle movements aligned precisely with O'Keefe's final moments. They emphasized the taillight fragments, the vehicle data, and Reed's own statements in the aftermath. The defense, meanwhile, doubled down on doubt. They brought in biomechanical experts who testified that the injuries were inconsistent with a vehicle strike. They questioned whether the taillight could have shattered in a different way, at a different time. They emphasized that no one saw O'Keefe get hit, no surveillance footage captured the impact, and no blood was found on the rear of the SUV in amounts expected from such a collision. As the retrial unfolded, public interest reached a fever pitch. Supporters clashed outside the courthouse. A blogger aligned with Reed's supporters was later charged with witness intimidation, adding another layer of drama. The judge imposed strict rules on courtroom behavior and demonstrations. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. When the verdict was announced, it stunned many. Corinne Reed was acquitted of second-degree murder, manslaughter, and leaving the scene of an accident. She was found guilty only of a lesser charge related to operating a vehicle under the influence and received probation. For some, the verdict confirmed what they had believed all along, that the case against Reed never rose above reasonable doubt. For others, it felt like justice denied. The story did not end there. John O'Keefe's family pursued a civil wrongful death lawsuit, determined to seek accountability outside the criminal courtroom. Online debates continue to rage, with thousands still arguing over what truly happened that snowy night in Canton. Was it a tragic accident, a fatal mistake fueled by alcohol and anger, or something darker, hidden behind conflicting testimony and unanswered questions? What is certain is this: a man lost his life, a community was divided, and the justice system was put under a microscope. The death of John O'Keefe and the trial of Corinne Reed stand as a reminder of how fragile truth can be, how evidence can be interpreted in different ways, and how certainty can slip through our fingers like snow. We hope you found this story as gripping as the fire beside you. Until next time, stay observant, stay curious, and remember, every crime leaves behind more than evidence. It leaves questions. Good night.